How's everybody doing? Okay, yeah, good. Feeling the summer vibes? Yeah. How was traffic? Is it better to not talk about that? Okay. Oh, I like that. Okay. Excellent. Smart. Excellent. Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Stesha Brandon. I'm the Literature and Humanities Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library. And as we begin tonight, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. Here in Seattle, these are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders, past, present, and future, and we thank them for their stewardship of this land. And I will also mention that as a library, we have a lot of resources that you can use if you wanted to learn more about colonialism and its impact on Native land and Native peoples. So check that out. Welcome to tonight's program presented with the KUOW Book Club, KUOW FM, and Third Place Books. I have a couple quick announcements just before we get started. We're grateful to the library's series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation and the Seattle Times, for their generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation, whose support helps the library provide free programs and services for everybody in our community. And finally, thank you to Finney Ridge Painting for sponsoring KUOW live events. There's going to be a Q&A after the event, and you should have received an index card that you can use to write your question, and at the end of the event, we'll come around and collect those. But if you didn't get an index card, I will also have extras at the end, so I can get those to you if you need one. And you also received a survey when you came in, and we invite you to fill that out at the end of the event and return them on this table here as you're heading out at the end of the night. And that really helps us plan our programming, and it gives you a voice in sort of what happens here at the library, so encourage you to fill that out. Now I am delighted to introduce Katie Campbell from KUOW FM. Katie joined KUOW's online team as an editor and reporter in 2024 after serving 3 years as senior producer of the local Morning Edition program. She's covered a variety of local topics, including the Seattle City Council elections and breaking news, and she also brings readers some levity with a weekly news quiz. In 2024, Katie created the KUOW Book Club, which features stories and authors from the Pacific Northwest. Katie picks monthly titles and provides analysis along the way, and ends each reading with an author interview, which gives readers a look behind the scenes from some of the most talented writers in the region. And I encourage you to join the KUOW Book Club. You can sign up for the newsletter, and they will send it right to your inbox, and then you can read along with Katie and the rest of the club. So please help me welcome Katie Campbell.
Thank you so much, Stesha, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the KUOW and Seattle Public Library Summer Reading Series. We're very excited, and I do want to thank one more time everyone who has made this partnership possible, including KUOW's live event sponsor, Finney Ridge Painting, and of course the library's sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library Foundation. We truly appreciate everyone's support so much, especially right now during this difficult time for public media. So thank you for coming out and for your continued support. Yeah, give yourselves a round of applause. Third Place Books is also with us tonight, and they've been a huge supporter of the KUOW Book Club. They do have books for sale tonight, so do pick up a copy at the end of the program, and Kim will stick around and sign. Speaking of our special guest this evening, Kim Fu is the author of 2 novels, a collection of poetry, and most recently, and most importantly for this evening, a story collection called Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century, which was the winner of the Washington State Book Award, the Pacific Northwest Book Award, and the Dunata Gleed Literary Award, as well as a finalist for the Giller Prize, the Ignite Awards, the Shirley Jackson Awards, and the Sarion International Prize? Yeah, we'll go with that. Thank you so much. Stories in this collection have been selected for Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy and Best of the Net, featured on LeVar Burton Reads and Selected Shorts, and optioned for television and film. And if you think that is already too much, you're wrong. Fu was longlisted for the 2023 Joyce Carol Oates Prize for Mid-Career Authors. Their writing has also appeared in the New York Times, Granta, The Atlantic, Bomb, Has Lit, and the TLS. And happily, Their next novel, The Valley of Vengeful Ghosts, is coming up in March 2026. Very exciting. So without further ado, Kim, would you please join me? Does it ever get old hearing all that rattled off for you?
Um, I feel like it's easier when people read the bio. Sometimes people like say something like really personal and moving with the book, and then they make me come up, and I'm like still kind of like reeling from the thing they just said, and I'm like, wait, what are we doing? What are we?
Do I need to
Um,
respond to that? Well, as I mentioned, you have another book coming up in March, so I just want to formally put you on the spot and say you do have to come back to the book club for that book.
I would absolutely love that.
Fabulous. Thank you. Well, maybe don't commit to it just yet because we'll see how I put you through the ringer this evening. So let's just jump right in, right? All right, great. So I know you're writing. I don't know a lot about yourself. I know that you grew up in Vancouver, Canada, but I want to know, a little bit more about you. So why don't you start by just telling us what you would say about yourself if you couldn't say that you are an author, a writer?
Oh,
No, that just removed everything.
that's a fun phrasing. Who am I outside of being a writer? Um, I think of myself as sort of constitutionally being a consumer of art more than a creator. So like more of a reader than a writer, kind of functionally, and then also just like a lover of all kinds of art. And I think that's something I really love about Seattle. Actually, is kind of the accessibility of a lot of kinds of art. We were just talking about like the accessibility of film in this city, right? I feel like there's all kinds of things I get to see on the big screen here that I wouldn't anywhere else. I love like the theater scene here. I love like the dance scene here. I actually wasn't that into dance until I moved to Seattle, actually, but because like the dance here is so great, I am a great lover of dance now. Um, I guess I would also tell people that I've lived in Seattle for 13 years, and I sort of imagine staying here indefinitely. And I feel like I'm a very Pacific Northwest person. Um, I also love clothes. To like the people who hear this later and can't see me, I'm wearing pants that were handmade in Portland.
And they're fabulous. So, one of the things I've thought a lot about over the last year of running the book club, and as I've read so many authors from the Pacific Northwest, all parts of it, is kind of this shared awe of the region. Like, I feel like it comes through in every Pacific Northwest writer's work in some way. And I mentioned this earlier. I also read your book, The Lost Girls of Camp Forevermore, as I was coming. I'm going to take that one more time. Hans said I could. I read your book, The Lost Girls of Camp Forevermore, in preparation for this conversation. And it was in that and in certain parts of Lesser Known Monsters where I kind of felt that. Do you think like the region has influenced your work and
Oh,
who you are?
oh yeah, absolutely. The, the the short stories in this book, and then actually like the setting of my next novel, are sort of superficially these like nowhere every towns. Like the exact place is never named, but I think it's like pretty obvious, especially to people who live here, that this is the dominant background. You know, that it's like filled with these like gloomy greens and grays and oceans and mountains and like the kinds of forests and trees we see here. I feel like I'm in love with kind of like a dream version of this landscape,
Ooh.
where I'm like allowed to do whatever I want with it, kind of, and that's why I keep doing that. Like, I won't name like a Seattle street, even if it would be like obvious to someone else, someone who lived here, like based on the other things I say about this street, just so I can have like total creative freedom over it. I had a copy editor once. Like I was explaining a lot of the stuff to them. I was like, I love being able to move around the geography, and I never say exactly where on the coast we are, and so it's like we could be here, we could be there, and they were like, okay, the sun still has to rise in the east.
Does it?
That was my response.
Can you say more about that like dream state? What are you when you're putting yourself into that space? What are you looking for creatively?
I feel like
Oop. Let's try that one more time.
it
There
went
we go.
red flashing, but now it's back. Okay. I feel like the whole reason you choose fiction to begin with, kind of like why you want the toolkit of fiction and not like the toolkit of nonfiction or other. I guess let's just use those two buckets. Um, is kind of like you want the ability to say things that you cannot say if you are strictly limited to fact. You know,
Yeah.
if you are strictly limited to to the situations of your life and like what you know of the world that can be expressed through fact. And I feel like for me, there's this way of like, well, why not go all the way with that kind of, right?
Mm.
If there's a way to get closer to what I want to say or like an emotional truth through really fantastical means, then I feel like how cool is it that you get to do that with fiction?
Yeah. Instead of just talking about the awkwardness of puberty, you could put wings on a girl's ankles.
Yeah, exactly. Which I feel like is to me like a little closer to the horror of it, right?
Yeah, very much so. So, in both Forevermore, The Lost Girls of Camp Forevermore, and Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century, your characters are experiencing or exploring, rather, this sense of self, it seems like. And especially in Lesser Known Monsters, you take these normal experiences, again, like puberty, and you throw wings on it. And you put this fantastical spin on something that I think most readers would be able to relate to in some way. What is it about like the mundane that inspires the fantastical for you?
So I feel like the way we live now creates a kind of emotional numbness a lot of the time. I feel like we are really inundated all the time with horror and also wonder, like with kind of overstimulation too. Like we see a lot of horrible things and we see a lot of wonderful things and we can no longer kind of experience them fully often because you kind of have to numb yourself to kind of keep going at all, I feel
Yeah.
like. And for me, I like as a reader, I feel like I've noticed that something is when there is a fantastical element or like a science fiction element or we're just set in kind of a different universe, it it breaks certain expectations and assumptions so that it like opens you back up again to break all of them and to kind of and to even like feel mundane feelings more profoundly again. Like I just read this short story by Alex E. Harrow that was about like a time traveling knight, and but I feel like the feelings that are being explored about kind of the feeling of being exploited by your employer or like what
Yeah.
real love is versus the love of like what like love of country versus like the love of like one real person in your life. I feel like there were these sort of small, really human, mundane feelings that I feel like I had access to really feeling them fully again because I was sort of disarmed and like all of my assumptions were broken by putting me in like a fantastical world by like having to reorient myself in this way. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
It does. It takes the mundane and makes it special and makes you kind of look at it twice and say like, is this as mundane as I thought, or is it just that it's part of the human experience and I take it for granted? Is kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I wrote about this in my initial check-in with the book club a couple of weeks ago, but I want to put the idea to you as well. So, Lesser Known Monsters felt to me like a modern version and a much less judgmental version of like the Seven Deadly Sins in a weird way. Maybe a better way to put it is like the 12 contemporary anxieties is kind of how I saw it. Because like you got bureaucracy and parasocial relationships and codependence, and then there's also classics like lust and wrath all mixed in there. Do you think I'm onto something there, or is that a little out
I
there?
like the 12 modern anxieties. I feel like that also could have been a title for this.
Awesome. Yes. Well, you told Northwest Asian Weekly recently that your favorite story in the collection, right, was the very first one, Pre-Simulation Consultation XF007867. Is that right? Is that your favorite one?
Uh, I feel like my answer to what is your favorite one sort of changes every day, every
Fair.
minute, kind of.
What's your favorite today?
I maybe June bugs. I think right
Okay, we're
now.
going to talk about
Because,
June bugs.
uh, I think because someone recently said to me that they're like afraid of June bugs now,
Fantastic.
or actually no, I've actually heard a lot of really interesting stories about June bugs because of that story, and I think
Okay.
that's like what's holding it a special place in my heart right now. Like other people have told me about like I worked at a gas station and one day like it got completely covered in June bugs, like it covered
No.
the roof and all the pumps, and it was just like you looked out and it was like the gas station was made out of June bugs.
That's terrifying.
And they said like I had gotten over that memory until I read your story.
Well, I'm jumping ahead in my questions then because I do want to talk about June bugs because again, like feeling like I felt influences or harkening back to certain themes. I got hints of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's famous short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, while reading June bugs. And so for those who maybe haven't read it, the narrator is in this abusive relationship until she finds I hesitate to say she finds the oomph to leave. I never want to suggest that, like, a victim of that kind of thing just has to find the oomph to leave. But she leaves. She finally has reached her end and she walks out. And she's staying in this old house that is overrun by June bugs. In particular, it's this like patio area, and she keeps just trying to ignore it. But she's kind of being gaslighted by these damn bugs and by everybody she tells about these bugs until they play a really wild role in the resolution of this story, and they save her in this odd way. What was that supposed to call to mind? Was the yellow wallpaper on your mind at all, or was that just kind of a coincidence?
I think the yellow wallpaper is a good framework for that story. I think the bugs kind of ultimately to me don't have like a moral valence is the thing. The bugs are just kind of like a vector of what happens to her, and the main interaction is between like her and like the world that is always trying to convince her that an unlivable situation is livable, and trying to like convince her that the things she sees with her real eyes, sees with her eyes, are not real, or that she can't trust her own feelings or her own perceptions. There was a version of that story actually where she had like a friendly, helpful neighbor, and that version wasn't working. Like I had to turn the neighbor into kind of like a malevolent force, like part of this world that is like making her question her perceptions and her reality, because that's the core of it. The bugs are sort of, they're just the way this is happening, and I feel like the reader's experience of like fear of the bugs, I hope kind of turns with that to be like the bugs are not the real problem here.
Yeah, I love how you put that. The I guess one way to put it, I recently listened to a podcast that got into how natural disasters were kind of comforting to the host because it wasn't as if nature is being malevolent towards you. It doesn't intend to hurt you. And that's kind of what the June bugs felt like. Like they're doing their thing. It's out of place. And it's not about you. It's just about the June bugs looking for warmth or something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do want to go back to the first story in the collection. And I have to tell you that as I read it, like by page 8, I literally wrote in my notes, I already know this book is everything I hoped it would be. I was very excited about it. You were grappling with a future in which we can revive dead people in one form or another, and how fraught that would be. And I really loved how you do this in the form of dialogue between a customer trying to create the situation, and she wants to see her mom again, her dead mother, and an operator who has to work within the confines of this faceless company's strict rules. So I want to read this selection from page 8. But there is one hard no. Violent racist fantasies, a naked hot tub party with Einstein and a unicorn, that's fine. That's up to the discretion of the operator. But I can't look at some flowers with my mom. I can't talk to her one last time. Silence. Shall we see about getting you a refund? The handbook said there are no refunds under any circumstances. You read the handbook. The refund policy is on the cover. Most people have a very positive experience having sex with unicorns. You're really hung up on the unicorn thing. And I love that. It's so
Performed that
normal.
really well, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm here all night.
I mean, a career in radio, obviously.
But it's so normal, especially that last line. You're really hung up on the unicorn thing. And it's totally abnormal, the situation that you put these two people in. What inspired that piece in particular?
Oh wow. I mean, so many things, right? I think actually at some point it was actually like had been trying to write like a nonfiction piece or like an essay about the way in which like technology kind of outstrips legislation, I guess, and more specifically like that it is companies trying to protect themselves and their own liability, like they're trying not to get sued, that determine the rules of like user-made content platforms, and how that has often ended up being really ridiculous about what gets allowed, what isn't allowed, what gets pulled down, what doesn't get pulled down, and it wasn't working as an essay at all. And then, so I feel like that's one avenue of it. I think another is I often come up with new characters through just voices. Often that's like my first glimpse of characters, is sort of just two disembodied voices kind of talking to each other and bouncing off of each other, and that's how they develop into character. I think this is the only time where a piece stayed that way, where it's like those disembodied voices stayed disembodied voices, and then as the story progressed, it became necessary for them to stay disembodied voices. Like that became important to the structure of the story and its reveals. I also think it kind of grew out of my own like concerns about my video game addiction, sort of, or in a more general way, like the appeal of fantasy and like escapism. Like that it would be easy to kind of choose a fantasy world over this one. And then I also think it's kind of, just speaking about their voices and the way they talk. I think it is also kind of about like customer service voice, or like, like if you have a customer service job and kind of the mask you sink behind and the way you talk to kind of get through the day, right? Like you're not really yourself. You're just like going through scripts, saying the things you're supposed to say. Or even if you like write a lot of work emails in a row, right? You can kind of like sink into this other voice. And in this story, I feel like one person is the operator, one person is the customer, and I feel like the customer starts out from this place of kind of entitlement, and they're full human selves, and the operator is kind of begins from this like faceless rote conversation kind of voice, but then like as the story goes on, they kind of break through that and have like a real human moment with each other. So yeah, I guess it's like everything everyone writes, it has like a million different seeds, I feel.
Yeah. It's also interesting. So the book came out in 2022. It's been on my list since then. We talked about that. I felt like the universe was telling me inherently to save it for this summer. So thank you, universe. But it's interesting to read that story now as like AI has become more of a thing, and like AI customer service. I found myself when I started the story thinking automatically that the customer service person must be an AI, and it's going to be this frustrating conversation for this person. And it's not that. Like, what is it like to even revisit your own work just a few years later when a lot has changed in the technology realm?
I feel like that is something very difficult about writing science fiction and speculative work in general. I actually threw away like a novel I was working on because it was like it was about video game programmers and like this whole like virtual world they were building, and I was like deep into it, and then all this ridiculous stuff happened with the metaverse and Mark Zuckerberg, and I was like, what I was trying to do was way less weird than what is coming out of his mouth right now, and I actually like gave up on that novel. But I do think that you have to kind of aspire to tell like human stories, so that like as the technology and the like the cool like as like the speculative elements possibly become more out of date, that there's still kind of like a beating human heart under it that hopefully ages better or like endures in some way.
Well, we'll just file that under another thing Zuckerberg has ruined. So thank you. Speaking of more human moments, I think my favorite story was "Do You Remember Candy?" And it honestly, it was like one of the saddest things I've ever read. It's about how everyone in humanity all at once loses their sense of taste. And I think it's so sad because it's so incomprehensible, especially after people did lose their sense of taste during the COVID pandemic, which terrified me. I remember that being like a thing that really captured my attention of like, I don't want that to happen to me. And you focus on a mother who is devastated by this loss and who helps others who are also deeply changed by it, and her daughter who is like frankly pretty fine with it and who figures out how to move on. So this is from the end of that story on page 214. "You don't get it," Allie, the mother, says. "You're too young." Jay shrugs. She glides on the wood floor in her socks toward the door. She glances back at her mother over her narrow shoulders, her expression knowing, almost haughty, suggesting she's privy to any number of things that Allie doesn't understand. And Allie realizes Jay will never understand. The people demanding Allie's services will be gone in a generation. She doesn't create sensations, she awakens the memory of them, and only in those who are primed for it, who want badly to return to those memories, who want to believe. There are internet rumors about unaffected, isolated communities in the Amazon, but Allie knows these will turn out apocryphal in the end. The sensuous, life-affirming pleasure upon which whole cultures were built, which caused empires to rise and fall, will die with Allie and her peers. Allie walks to the window where Jay had been sitting. Jay has gone outside without a hat or a jacket, without a jacket or a hat, rather. A thin, hard layer of snow covers their front lawn. Her headphones are in. Jay is dancing, tossing her head, pirouetting on a booted foot. The snow sparkles around her, the winter sun low and blinding. Jay wraps her arms around her middle, still swaying, the picture of joy. That was really striking because it's beautiful and hopeful, but also it's sad. It depends on who you are considering, I think, most in that moment, the mother or the daughter. So again, I want to ask just what was on your mind as you were writing that?
Oh, so many things. Um, when I hit upon, so that story was not the last story written, but it is the story that closes the book. And when I wrote it, in particular, when I wrote that scene and that image, I that was when I believed in the book. Like up to that point, I was having to sort of tell myself with a lot of the little lies you tell yourself to kind of keep going through a writing project, where I was like, I'm just writing a bunch of short stories. I'm just writing short stories. Like, we'll see what happens. Like, no one said I was writing a book. Like, who knows? But there was something about that image that felt to me like the ending of a book that I believed in now, and like the image that everything, all the other stories could kind of point towards, that we're moving towards this moment of like generational alienation, is one thing that's happening there, right? Like of this sense that they will never understand each other, and also like it is a moment of grief, right? It is a moment of grief for like the way you thought the world would be, and in particular for this this representative of like an older generation of like, I thought the world would be one way. The world has changed so fast. The world is constantly changing so fast in ways that were utterly incomprehensible moments ago, and I feel this tremendous grief for everything I've lost. But then also, like, look at all the joy that remains, and look at all this joy embodied in like a next generation who, who at least in that moment, like, represents hope and represents like a new way of navigating and adapting, and like how horrible that they have to, but also like how how exciting and joyous that they can, I guess.
Life finds a way, or more than that, like joy finds a way.
I hope so.
I was just going to ask, like, if that is the culmination of the book, is that what you needed? Is that what you need from your own work? That, like, look of hopefulness?
Oh, that's interesting. No one's ever asked me that before.
What I'm here for, Kim.
I don't. I have noticed actually, like that in the writers I love most, there is a real like humanism and hope to them. They are often more hopeful writers than I am. They are often more kind of loving to other people as writers than I am, especially in like my first drafts, sort of. I feel like my first drafts as they come out, very often the ending is, and everybody died. But like a lot of the writers I love, it's like, yeah, there is a deep like sweetness and a love of people, and like a real feeling like every person is like really valuable, and that like humanity in itself is really inherently valuable. And I think that's like a direction I have to push my work in. It's like it's not something that comes naturally to me.
Sure.
And it is something I think about. I also think that because like sad endings and bad things happening are easier for me to write, that also is a sign to me that that's a thing to push against. Like very often a happy ending is extremely difficult for me to write or even like conceive of. And I've often found that saying like, what would the happy ending be, is like very illuminating, and like very challenging, and then like ultimately very satisfying.
I love that as like a writing prompt. Like just write a story. Okay, what would the happy ending of that be then? So I mentioned that within Lesser Known Monsters, I saw like 12 contemporary anxieties. How much of your writing, not just in this collection, but generally, is an expression of your own anxieties and your own needs, would you say?
Oh, all of it. All of it. My novel that comes out in March actually, is, among other things, about a woman. It is about a woman who buys a model home in like a failed housing development, and this sort of torrential rain begins, and water kind of seeps into the house, and at the same time that she's sort of losing her grip on reality. Um, and I live here.
I was
Right?
gonna say.
Like, and I do think that like that whole novel kind of like grew out of like my own anxieties and nightmares. I uh, I am not yet practiced in talking about this novel yet.
It's okay.
But so my home flooded, like in a similar way, like where, water was coming in through all the doors and windows.
Wow.
Water like took out the ceiling, and after that had happened, I started having these nightmares where the water heater blew. Like I would have this recurring nightmare where like I'm in one room and I hear water and I run to the water heater and it's exploded. Um, and then one day it happened, like exactly the way it had happened in my nightmares. And in the grand scheme of things, this is like not that bad of a thing to happen to a person. But in my head, it was like, oh, your nightmares come true. Like
Yes.
your anxieties are real. And that
This
was
is about as it could happen. Yeah.
that's kind of like a thing, a reconfiguring of your brain a little bit to be like, oh, your nightmares are real. But I do think like one of the great things about being a writer is there's more than one way that your nightmares are real. And I do sort of feel like this surreal novel that I ended up writing, kind of came out of that experience, and it came out of like being able to transform your nightmares into something that is like hopefully edifying to other people,
Yeah.
or like even maybe that's even the whole project of art, right? Is like to transform your pain into like shared pleasure.
Oh yeah, totally. I just interviewed another Seattle author, Isabel Cañas, incredible horror writer, and she talked about like in her mind the idea of the tortured artist doesn't exist because she needs to be happy and feel safe in her space. And I was like, I know some artists who would disagree, but that's okay. Also, we just had a tsunami advisory, so I feel like the whole concept of flooding that rings a little true right now. And I'm from Florida. That has happened. So we're talking a little bit about what inspires you. What gets you in the mood for writing, or are you one of those annoying people who can just sit down and do it whenever?
Oh God, no.
Thank goodness.
No, I mean, like I know lots of writers who like they write at the same time every day and like the same day of the week. They have like set word counts, set hours. They process journal, and it doesn't make their writing any less like amazing or beautiful. It works for them. I have never been that kind of writer. I wasted years of my life trying to become that kind of writer, I would say. I have always been like, I just whenever I can, I like write something is all I've ever thought about it as. And usually it is not like blocks of publishable prose. Like usually it's like a line here or there, like a scrap of something, like a thought, a jumble of scenes, like a pile of words. Like that is always where I have to begin. And it is always like in the cracks. And it is like totally unpredictable for me or how it fits into my life and when I do this. Like sometimes it's like I write something on the back of a receipt in a bus stop. Sometimes it's like 20 minutes. Sometimes it's like 3 days. And I'm just like sitting there and day and night is passing and I don't know what's going on. The dishes are piling up next to me. But yeah, I've never, it's maybe wild to say, but even at this point, I still don't have like a writing routine. Writing is still this kind of really messy and spontaneous process for me.
It's nebulous that just kind of comes and goes like it wants to. It's very rude. Do you have any cultural like junk food that you like to consume, especially in those moments of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to go and return to X.
Cultural junk food.
Yeah.
Um, right now, I am watching a Korean reality game show. I don't know if that's what you
Question
call it, called
mark?
The Devil's Plan. It's like it is like a group of people being forced. It's a reality show about a group of people who are forced to live in a house together and play these unbelievably complicated board games, sort of,
Awesome.
with like really high stakes. Like if they lose, maybe they get kicked off, but maybe also they get like worse living conditions or less food or whatever.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's very intense and very, but it's wonderful cultural junk food.
Okay.
Now that I have that phrase.
How about cultural caviar to turn it and like something more refined, maybe a capital L literature that you like to return to?
Oh, when I was talking about writers who I feel like have like this deep love of people and of humanity, I feel like the two that were in my head were Kevin Brockmeyer and Elizabeth McCracken. I feel like are both people who love people. Kevin Brockmeyer is like not that much older than me, and I'm almost 40, but like I think of him as like, oh, that's who I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah.
I feel like his work is like beautiful from a literary perspective, but I also do feel like it philosophically it feels like it comes from such like a warm and generous place, and everything he writes, all of his novels and short fiction. But then I also just read like a short craft lecture that he had like published online about like the roles that animals play in short stories, and even that felt to me just like infused with like this generosity and like this generosity of spirit, where I feel like I want to be like that.
Yeah. I want to talk to you a little bit about short stories too. Like for me, I've been on this short story kick in the last year. Like I've been consuming tons of collections of them. I'm a big horror fan. I read Never Whistle at Night, which is a collection of indigenous horror stories. It's incredible. And what I liked about it was like you got tastes of different tribal cultures on top of getting these different styles. But I wonder what it's like to write short stories for you. Like, because you've also written novels. Like, do you have a preference? Is there something that makes you feel more like whole at the end, or do you have a preference for your own work, novel versus short story?
What's funny is like with this one coming out in March, I will technically have 3 novels, and I only have one short story collection. But I have started to think of myself as constitutionally a short story writer. And it's just like sometimes a short story gets away from me and wants to be 300 pages, kind of.
You're talking to a journalist who used to be in newspapers. I know.
But yeah, I think I think it may be kind of like the form I love the most in a lot of ways. I love I think fundamentally I love that they're short, sort of, and all the things that does, that it forces you to be really concise, it forces you to be really immediate, it makes you feel like you have this fast moving kind of tenuous relationship with the reader's like attention. And like a lot of things have to be implied, a lot of things have to be left at the page. You have to like really mean and care about every word you leave.
Yeah.
And I think like as a reader, it's kind of incredible that like you say let's say you read like one collection in like over a weekend. It's like, and then you have entered and exited like a dozen worlds and a dozen lives that feel as like big and real to you as a novel. I just finished like an older best American science fiction and fantasy, and it was so cool, like getting to like encounter a lot of writers I didn't know, and like that I'm excited about to like go and read their books now. Like it's like this great jumping off point, and to all of these writers. And yeah, and I also think like, and short stories were actually like my introduction to adult literature, like when I was a kid.
Oh, interesting.
Like the first books I read that were for adults, when I was a child, were Roald Dahl's short stories, which are not for children at all. But you would not know that from the way some of them are covered and like marketed and like shelves. So it was like by accident. But I do feel like that was like my introduction into literature. Sort of was the short story, and like the short story's ability to make adult lives and adult stories as like magical as children's stories.
Yeah. I I love that idea, and I think you should talk to schools and libraries about that because we're having this national conversation, right? And actually, I'll throw a plug in for NPR. Right now, they're collecting books that you read in high school that like made a huge impact on you, and then also books that we think high school students should be reading now. Like we read like Emily Bronte, and like Pride and Prejudice was a thing, and like are those classics what we still should have kids read? And I wonder if like those short story collections are maybe a more approachable way into capital L literature, more so than the classics.
Oh, I'm not vouching for that.
I'll vouch for
I'm not
it.
putting those stories in kids.
Okay, that's fair. Maybe not the ones you read. That's fair enough.
No, that's really interesting though. I do feel like this is like a really good moment to reassess what are the classics. And I do feel like there is a lot of literature there are a lot of books now that I feel like straddle an interesting place of being able to hold the attention of like a non-reader is what I think. Masquerade by Sangoyomi. That's a book that I was thinking would be like a great book to recommend to someone who didn't like books, sort of.
Fantastic.
Like it is like, and like I feel like it was like a great book from like a literary perspective for sure. But I also feel like it was like so entertaining and so page turny, and I felt like it was difficult for me to imagine a reader who would like turn away from it.
Sure.
I guess.
I kind of felt that with your collection too, of like there's so many, even if one story isn't for you, say June bugs isn't for you because you already hate June bugs and the concept of reading about a horde of June bugs is terrifying. Like there's the story, was it 20 Hours, where they have created a human printer and there's a couple that has killed each other and they reprint, but it gets into kind of like again, the mundanity of like spending life with one person for X number of years. Like it felt like you were tapping into something for everyone. Did you aim to do that, or are you just that good?
I definitely did not aim to do that.
Okay.
I don't think that's within my abilities. In a way, I don't feel like aiming for anything is within my abilities. Sort of. I feel like the truth lies closer to your question about like, are these just your anxieties? And I do feel like they come from that place. I think actually there was a phase like after my first book came out and then before I wrote The Lost Girls of Camp Forevermore, where that was like a paralyzing thought, kind of like thinking about what do people want and like imagining people read it was like really pulled me up short and made it like really difficult to write in a way that never had been before, because now I like knew what the experience of being published was like.
Sure.
And I think that there has to be kind of at the beginning like a phase where you pretend no one will ever read it, you know, and you are really in like a totally free experimental space all by yourself, just writing about the things that compel and obsess you and the things that are most entertaining to you, and for an ideal reader that is kind of like you, like I to your like highest judgment, you know, like you want to write something that you, the reader, would love. Like if you were completely disconnected from this work, if you didn't know everything that went into it. To me, that's a reasonable like and kind of high bar, right? Like the you that loves books, would they love this book?
Yeah.
And then I think by being that like specific and weird and idiosyncratic and just yourself, that's what ends up connecting with other people.
Sure.
Like I was just teaching at a workshop in Portland, which is why I bought the pants. But one of my students, I noticed actually a lot of not just in my workshop class, but also in like the participants in this workshop more generally, a lot of students had this impulse to kind of sand down their quirks or like pull back from the things that like made their writing unique actually, and like made it sound the most like themselves. And one person put it to me as, I feel like I need to write like Chekhov. And I said, but we have a Chekhov. We don't have a you. And I feel like that's what it boils down to, is like you can't write something for everybody. If you write for you and like the truest you and like the high, you know, you at your most judgmental, I guess, that will like paradoxically be what connects connects with readers, connects with other people.
Yeah, that tough critic inside you is actually working towards creating something really beautiful.
That's
Yeah.
where I've landed.
Yeah. I guess too, why did you start writing to begin with? Like, when did you start? Where did this journey start for you?
So I have a notebook, like in a closet at home from when I was 6, that's labeled book 2. So presumably there was a book 1. And nobody remembers, like nobody knows. Nobody in my family thought this was a good idea. No one like suggested I do this. What I assume happened is that I learned to read and I was like, oh, I want to do this. Like I just started imitating the things I was reading. But I started writing stories and poems and like journaling from literally before I can remember. And I always wanted to be a writer and I was always writing. And then I took a little dip at one point where I was convinced that this is not a career, this is not a job, this is not a thing people do, and I briefly attempted to become a chemical engineer, and that was like the only years of my life where I wasn't writing, and it was so miserable that I thought, okay, I would rather be a failed writer than a successful chemical engineer. And things have worked out very well in my favor since then.
Thank goodness. Do you have what's like the earliest thing that you wrote that you can remember? Or like what was book 2 about? Do you know what book 2 was about?
Book 2 is almost illegible. But I do
Done.
remember in like I think grade like 2nd or 3rd grade, I like wrote a bunch of horror stories and I like made a cardboard cover and I stapled it together and I gave it to my 2nd or 3rd grade teacher. I don't know what they thought of it or what came of it, but I remember the process of putting that together. So I started out with horror and I started out with short stories, and it took me a long way to come back, I guess.
We would have been best friends when we were little. So I have like 1 or 2 more questions. Do you remember that y'all have your post-it and your note card? So I will take some questions from y'all. But I want to ask you 1 or 2 more questions that we've been asking on the KOW podcast. Shameless plug. Meet Me Here is the name of the podcast. So I've been asking something, especially of our authors that we have on the show, that I've really enjoyed the answers I've gotten, and that is, Kim, what is your literary hot take?
Oh, I'll go back to the Chekhov thing.
Perfect.
I feel like the hot take version of that is you can't be good at everything.
Mm.
And I feel like a lot of writers, what they should be doing, like a lot of developing and emerging writers, is they should be leaning into the things that they're good at and the things that make them stand out and writing in only the way they can write. And I think it's fine to want to, grow as a writer and want to develop your craft toolkit and like learn how to do more things. But I feel like there's a lot of fighting your instincts that I do not understand. Like a lot of students will say to me like, "Oh, everything I write is really short." Or they'll say like everything I write is really long, and I'll be like, and like why is that a problem? Like
Yeah.
so you are a great writer of Flash, or like so you want to write a 400-page novel. Like
Right.
I don't see what's wrong with that. And there's kind of like a fault where they feel like I need to like there's this like I have to crush my instincts and I have to become what I think people want. That I find very strange. And more often what you need to do is you need to just tell the reader what we're doing,
Yeah.
and that often means being weirder, like, and being weirder earlier, like be like
Yes.
the maximally weirdest on page 1, and the reader's like, okay, I know what we're doing, we're going on this ride, right? Don't squash the weirdness down, don't try to hide it till later, don't try to like weave it in subtly just for yourself, like don't do that, just go big immediately. Let us know what ride you're taking us on, and I think like that's what'll ultimately be. I think that's what else will be great.
Yeah, and that you can be proud of. As an avid reader of the weird, like any readers in the room or writers in the room rather, please write weird. I love weird. Stasha was just telling me about a really weird book that she's going to tell me the name of, but she's judging for an awards contest. So thank you for that. Encourage more students to be weird. To that end, I would also love your recommendations for like things that we should be reading, movies that we should be consuming, food that you would turn to for like this is like recommended if you liked lesser known monsters of the 21st century. Like what is the vibe setter for people who really enjoyed your collection?
Oh. um, like Karen Russell and George Saunders are the obvious ones. Um, wow. I love the idea of pairing it with food. I'm trying to think about that.
I've done that a
Uh,
couple of times for some of the books we've featured on the show, and like, you'd be surprised.
I feel like little decadent things.
Ooh, yeah.
So like clementine oranges and like chocolate covered almonds and like or like things that or anything that is like tiny and rich, like a
Yeah.
tiny medallion of steak. I don't know. I have this vision of like tiny, extremely rich things, or what you pair with it.
That sounds fabulous.
I'm gonna keep chewing on that. That's
Yeah,
like that's
keep-
really interesting. What do you pair with it?
I have a couple of recommendations. Unfortunately, I don't know the name of the author off the top of my head, but it's called The Cage Went in Search of a Bird. It's these Kafka-esque short stories that might be up your alley. Like one of the ones that stands out to me is a woman it feels like near future New York City. I don't know if it specifies. She goes looking for an apartment, and the housing market has become so wild that she is considering a basement apartment in which like the ladder into it ends 6 feet above the floor, so you literally have to drop down into your apartment. And she's like seriously considering it because it's that bad. So it feels like very in line with the vibe, I would say. And then after reading Do You Remember Candy? Just anything sweet. I really wanted I was like, oh my God, what if I lose my sense of taste right now? I need to go to my favorite restaurant immediately every day.
A couple of writers came to mind in translation. Yoko Ogawa and Sayaka Murata. I also would throw in there.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Oh, and then so we were talking about how because of SIF, you see a lot of great movies in Seattle
Yes.
that you cannot recommend to people because there's no way for them to watch it. But there was a movie I saw at SIF this year called By Design that I felt
Ooh.
so like powerfully, like I loved it, but I was also a little jealous. Like I was like, I wish I made this movie.
Uh-huh.
And it's a movie about a woman who changes bodies with a chair. And it is
Whoa.
also like a dance film. Like they just break into choreographed dance with with no explanation or transition. And like the dialogue is super weird on purpose. Like it's kind of like a Pinter play. Like people don't quite talk like real people,
Okay.
and they deliver these little speeches, and it's like really stylized and like really amazing. And just yeah, and like there's this speech at one point where she says like how this woman like wishes she was a city, she wishes she was a landscape, that like it like spoke to my soul, and like I feel like what I was trying to do with monsters. So that movie is like a perfect pair.
Fantastic. Yeah, that sounds like you now that I know you better. But yeah, I don't know how to recommend how to watch that either, which is kind of perfect in a weird way. I see we have some questions, Desha. Fabulous. Thank you so much. Ooh, and even on some napkins, y'all are creative. Okay. So, Kim, what gives you optimism for the future? So there's two questions on this. We'll start with that one.
Thinking hyper local, I guess. I feel like I feel a lot of despair when I think any bigger than that, and I feel like just shrinking that question down and down and down and down until you feel like there's something you can do. Like there's something you can do for your immediate community. Like maybe you shrink it down to Washington, maybe you shrink it down to Seattle, maybe you shrink it down to your neighborhood. Maybe there's like something you can do for your neighbor. I feel like make the question smaller, and then there's hope, and then there's like action.
I love that. The other question this individual had is, what are some women in science fiction that inspire how you write women? Ooh, there's another one too. Look at that.
There's this story called Erase and Rewind that's in a collection called Erase and Rewind as well, that I think about a lot as like being as like an inspiration. So in the story, a woman realizes she has the ability to travel backward in time the morning after she's assaulted. And I felt like that story, like about time travel, was like truer to that kind of morning than any like realist description I'd ever read. Um, Red Clocks by Lenny Zumas is also like an incredible, like apocalyptic-y kind of book. Well, not even really anymore. I feel like it was when it came out, and now it just feels like it's just describing the world we live in. But
Goody.
it's like it was a dystopian novel about like reproductive rights as well. Um, and then we were just talking. I just read I Who Have Never Known Men
Mhm.
by Jacqueline Hartman, which was this book from the 90s that was Belgian and in French originally, that for some reason is having like this big resurgence in 2025.
Moment.
Like my French editor recommended it to me, but then it was everywhere. Like I had no, I bought it at Secret Garden in Ballard, like, and it was just like in the front display. And that's a apocalyptic book that is like really about like women and like being women and also it's like really formally interesting. I feel like it doesn't. I feel like it basically flaunts every piece of conventional writing advice you could think of
Ooh.
in a way that is really interesting to me. Like to think of how it can still function while doing that
Yeah.
is really useful. Han Kang, the vegetarian, I think.
Oh,
Yeah, I feel like
yes.
that's also like this like incredible like feminist howl kind of about
Yes.
womanhood. Yeah, I guess.
Fantastic. Yeah, sorry, I'm just like, oh my God, that was such a great book. I read it twice, both back to back. A quick note on Who Have Never Known Men. That is truly having a moment, like in Seattle too. It is among the top bestsellers at like a lot of local independent bookstores. We've been talking to booksellers, the producer I work with, Brandy Fullwood, and I, and like people keep telling us about this book. So like, if you haven't read it, now is apparently the
Belgian
time.
book from 1995. Like something's happening.
It is resonating. I had to wait I think 6 weeks to get it on the Libby app with Seattle Public Library. There's even a whole tier. So people are reading it. So read it. The other question that this person has is how many stories got cut from lesser known monsters? So there's 12, but how many could there have been if you were given your druthers?
Actually, only one got cut through the
Oh.
process, and I feel like it was completely correct to be cut. My at the point where like before I was going out on submission with publishers, my agent and her assistant both thought we should cut it, and I was like, let's leave it in for now. And then like the editor who bought it at Tin House thought she should cut it, and I was like, what do other people at the house think? And they all thought we should
Oh
cut
no.
it. So I was like, oh, okay, fine, that's probably right. But no, I think it was ultimately the right choice. It was a story that was actually written with really specific parameters. It was actually written for the magazine that like the Seatback magazine on Air Canada flights.
Fabulous.
They did like this summer fiction project where it was like the story had to be a really specific length. It had to be about a specific Canadian place. It couldn't have swear words. It like, you know, sex could only be alluded to. Like there was a lot of like parameters about this like summer fiction project. I think it had to be set in summer.
Okay.
And so it was, you know, a story I had written for this hyper-specific project. It was also written in the second person and it just did not play well with the other stories. Like I still like it. I think
Sure.
it's like a good story. I stand by it. But there was like nowhere you could put it in the book where it made sense. I feel
Got
like where
it.
it does not talk to the stories around it in the right way. And I think everybody else was ultimately right.
Funny. Well, now that you've just, as This American Life might say, acknowledged the existence of sex, I'm going to go to this question. Somebody says, I'd love to hear you talk about scissors. What was your inspiration? The story made me uncomfortable in the best way possible. Was that intentional? And maybe describe for some folks who haven't read the book what Scissors is about.
Okay, so Garth Greenwell and Aro Kwan were editing an anthology called Kink. So the submission call was like stories about sex, desire, kink, and BDSM. And when I got this call, I had this instinct to, like, my first instinct is to write a story where the sex is bad.
Okay.
I feel like to me, that felt safe from a literary
Mm.
perspective. Like to write a story about interpersonal conflict where the sex is bad, and that's like literature, you know?
Yeah.
But Garth actually writes and speaks a lot about kind of the underutilization of sex in literature. And in particular, like the underutilization of pleasure and how it can be like really revealing of character and also like cultural meaning and like metaphysical meaning. And I found his arguments really powerful. And the thought of trying to write a story that's actually supposed to be sexy was like the scariest thing in the world to me. Like it seems so like inherently like humiliating kind of. But as has already come up, I feel like when you are like super afraid to write something, that often means there's something there. Um, the more like direct inspiration of this story, actually. So the story is about two performers in a stage show that involves scissors in a BDSM manner. When I first moved to Seattle, so I think this was around 2012, the first time I went to Hump, which is the amateur short pornographic film festival that Dan Savage curates here, there was a film that was in black and white. It was extremely short, like it was like I think it was only a minute, and it was just one person running a knife over another person. And they don't cut them or pierce them or anything. They just like run a knife over another person's skin, and that's it. That's all that happens. And in that theater, people were freaking out, like everyone was so tense, so uncomfortable. Like you could hear people like making these like noises of like distress and like turning away from the screen. And it was like this very intense energy in the theater. And I remembered that feeling, like 15 years later, I guess, or not quite, not quite 10 years later, I remembered the feeling in that theater. And I feel like in that story, I was trying to recapture that feeling. While writing a story that was supposed to be sexy, like it was supposed to be erotic, which I think is terrifying. And some days I have to pretend that story doesn't exist, and certainly that it was never published, and certainly that no one I know has ever read it.
Well, Kim, I have read it, and I'll tell you, it was sexy. And that now that you've described the like source tension, I get it, because I think I felt like I was like stiff as a board reading it, because you're just like, oh, what is happening? There's like an interpersonal conflict. It feels like off screen, if you will. Like, how is that going to manifest? It was something. It was, yeah. So well done. Moving on to not a question about sex. Can you talk about the title of the book and how it came to be?
So at a point where I had not written all the stories, but I think the majority of them, something like 10 of them, I had a friend of mine read them all. And I asked them, what do you remember? Like, what sticks out to you after reading all these together? And one of the things they remembered was sort of the few literal monsters in the book had stuck out to them in a certain way. And then also, I had heard, I'm mentioning him a lot, but I had heard Kevin Brockmeyer speak, and he told this story about way back when he was like a MFA student. He turned in a story that had no ghosts in it, and his professor said, "This is a ghost story." And I had been thinking, all the stories in the collection that do not have a monster in them are monster stories. And that to me was a useful framework for editing the stories and like conceptualizing the stories. And to me, what I meant by a monster was kind of like the way a monster functions in a horror movie, as like something to focus on, kind of, and something like a literalization of like a feeling or a conflict is made into a monster, like is made into something we can look at, and is something so big that it forms like kind of a nucleus to the story, that it's like pulling everything in the story towards it. And thinking about the stories that way helped me a lot. And I also liked this idea of the book as kind of a monster compendium, kind of like that each of these stories is about like the 12 anxieties, right?
Right.
Like the 12 modern anxieties,
Yes.
I feel like is how the 21st century part gets attached to it.
Yeah, the monsters are the things that live in the back of your head or that are driving your anxiety or whatever that may be. Love that. All right, this is on the back of a napkin.
These
which
are
I
great
love.
questions.
These
by
are
the way.
really
Thank you,
great
guys.
questions. Thank you all so much for this. So this person writes, a lot of filmmakers often start with a short that they later expand into a full-length film. I should have just read this before I read it out loud. Are there any of these stories that you're envisioning as novels or novellas? Also, I listened to the audiobook and loved the narrators. Do you have control over the choice? So let's start with the first one, actually. Anything going to become a novel or a novella?
I don't think so.
Doesn't think so.
I feel like I never know. I feel like
Fair.
I never know about what like one time somebody said like, do you think you'll ever write a biography? And that seemed really out of left field to me. But I was like, I don't know, like maybe. Like I feel like I feel like I have so little control over my writing impulses, and like there's so many things that I've done now that I would never have guessed at before, that it's like maybe I'll write a biography, who knows. And so the way I feel right now is that when I finished each of these stories, it was like the dream closed to me, kind of, and I could only sort of read them as a reader would at a certain point. And it wasn't like, and that's sort of like how I know something is done. Is it's not like, oh, it's perfect now. It's like I can't get in anymore. Like it no longer feels like an infinite matrix of possibilities. It's just it is what it is now. It has its own universe and it kind of closes. And there's a way in which, like, the answers to questions that are not on the page, I don't really know those answers anymore. Like they feel like all of those possibilities are open again, because like I don't the truth belongs to the story now, the truth belongs to the reader now. So all of those worlds feel closed to me in a way that I can't imagine, turning them into something longer. But I also feel like, who knows? Like I feel like I say that and then maybe in 5 years one of them will be. The audiobook question about do you have control over the casting? I would say not really in general, but it is kind of like I'm not 100% sure of this. I would guess that contractually I have zero power, but people are nice and they want you to like it. So people's like audition, the narrators they were thinking about were shared with me, and so like I could weigh in a little bit at that stage. But I'm mostly very excited when I get a multi-reader cast at all. Kind of like that's a big investment for the audiobook producers, and I feel like it makes a huge difference. I love that Monsters has like a multiple reader cast. I love that Lost Girls, my previous novel, did as well. And yeah, and I'm also very happy with them. I think like the audiobook experience is so cool because there's so many ambiguities that those actors have to make decisions about, kind of, like where they pause or where they say like, or the emphasis they put on like an or an changes everything so much in a way that is really fascinating to me and is this like other insight into the way things are experienced.
As an audio person who works in audio, I love an audiobook, and I've really enjoyed how much of a production that they've become. Like we were talking about Sequoia Nagamatsu's How High We Go in the Dark has like 16 plus narrators, and it just brings life to the characters. Or Paul Tremblay's horror movie, his most recent book, is done as a production in and of itself as the audiobook. Like it is the takes they did to record it became part of the story in a really creepy and unsettling and fabulous way. So if that's your thing, you should listen to that audiobook. This person wants to know more about the pants and clothing in general as an art form.
The pants are from a store in Portland called Kiriko Made, and they're from salvaged Japanese fabric, but they're handmade by Portlanders. Um, I love clothes as an art form. I think that is sort of tied to like my gender expression and my gender identity, where I feel like in a lot of ways gender has felt very fraught for me, in particular like with language. So I feel like talking about my gender, describing my gender, writing about my gender has always felt really difficult to me. But I've always loved clothes, and I feel like clothes feel like this space of like play and expression, where I can land on something that feels like true to me, and it's like, oh, this really feels like me, in a way that is sort of beyond language. In the same way that there's like a lot of art forms I feel like that are untranslatable, right? Like that, like why a dance piece is so amazing is because you have expressed something in dance that could not be expressed in any other form. And I feel like clothes give me a kind of space to be like my gender in a way that I can't, like I have a lot of trouble articulating or expressing any other way, I guess.
They make a statement as you walk into a room of just like, oh, I get Kim's vibe at the very least.
Or like this is like I feel like it has been freeing to sort of think of it as an art, to think of it as think of it the way I think of other arts, as like you get to like thinking of your body as a canvas instead of a burden, I guess, or
Yes.
like and also as like as you being in control of it too, you being in control of people's perceptions and your expressions, like to a certain degree. I think if especially if you've always felt like the burden of other people's assumptions, like what people see things when they look at you and they make assumptions about who you are and where you come from, and they're projecting things onto you. But like clothes are like this one vector of control for me. It's like, but I get to decide this one thing.
I love that. Well, our last question is really more of a thank you, which is going to be perfect because I think we should be wrapping up, and I will get into my thank yous as well. And this individual says, "Thank you for your book. I especially loved the human printer stories, which is." Oh, the slash the box to rewind time, which was also an interesting concept. Like you took the concept of a time machine and you made it small, at least on its face, and like a children's toy, which I also really enjoyed. So thank you so much for your work. And yeah, let's give Kim a round of applause. And I would once again like to thank KUOW's live sponsors, Finney Ridge Painting, and the library's sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation, the Seattle Times, and the Seattle Public Library Foundation. The Summer Book Club truly would not have been possible without y'all's help. Thank you so much to you in particular, Stesha. As a reminder, we have one more summer event coming up on August 27th. If you haven't already signed up, please RSVP and join us again at 6:30 p.m. here at the Central Library for our next book club event with author Linda V. Mapes. We're going to be talking about her latest book, The Trees Are Speaking, Dispatches from the Salmon Forests. As I mentioned earlier, Third Place Books is here tonight with copies of Kim's books. So please grab a copy, stick around to have Kim sign. She and I are going to be up here to chat with y'all until about 8:30ish. And thank you again so much for coming, and thank you, Kim, for all of your wonderful work.
Thank you so much for
Great.
choosing the book and for being here.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to have you back next year. Thank you.